Okay, this is our Math 244 pre-recorded Friday lecture. Now, of course, this week we are talking about one-way ANOVA. Here's our little, oh, that's a stats toolbox. I meant to look at this instead. Move this down so I can see it. There we go. The checklist, you got the one-way ANOVA, get that nailed down, that you're familiar with that. And then you extend it out to two-way ANOVA, which we are talking about Wednesday. And so you might be wondering, well, if we covered all of that, what are we going to talk about today? Something I had mentioned way back our first week when we were talking about the randomized double-blind controlled experiments and how you're able to uncover things and learn things that you almost couldn't do any other way. And several years ago, I was looking at the research and findings of what's been learned about how our brains work. And it was interesting that most of what we know has been learned in the last 35 years. But even more interesting was the research they've done on which study techniques are more effective than others. And the results are rather surprising. Because here's the thing, and this is odd, that I think most of us think we may know which study methods work best for us. I know how I learn best, but guess what we found out through research? We don't know. We think we know, but we don't know. Well, that's a funny thing, but these statistical methods were able to uncover this. And then on top of it, the neurologists were able to explain why that worked at the cellular level. And so this is all very interesting, but I was trying to figure out how could I present this to my students in a meaningful way without going off on all these tangents about how and why it worked. Well, the answer to my prayers was I came across a presentation that Sandra McGuire had created, this PhD, and it was exactly what I could have ever hoped for. Here, let me take it from the start. Now this is her presentation I'm giving. She actually created the PowerPoint slides, and all I have to do is a little bit of editing. And here's what would happen is, she was known for this presentation at her university, and the professors would ask her, could you come in and give that presentation for my class today? Because they just bombed the last test. And whenever you give this presentation, you just turn things around. And so this is that presentation she gives. It only takes 50 minutes. And the results have been rather dramatic. Here's how she starts off. She starts asking, what their career track is. And we're talking about jobs that pay you for your ability, not just your GPA. And she also pointed out that the students who attended this session that they're sitting in right now, that they had a course average of a B versus a C average for those who were absent and missed this session. And so she just wanted to point out to them they're in the right place. That's Sandra on the left. Here's an award they got, but that's nothing compared to the presidential award she got. So what exactly did she do? Well, she allowed students to allow their dreams to come true because they were bombing their classes. Now, understand, we're going to just look, this is anecdotal. We're going to look at 3 of these students, but, she's given this, well over 10,000 students, this presentation. But what these 3 students had in common is they knew they had to do something different. They were bombing their exams. So what's in the black font, that's the exam scores they were getting out of 100 points before seeing Sandra McGuire's presentation. And these were their scores afterwards because they implemented the concrete steps that she gave them that would turn around their grades. And same thing with Joshua here, just bombing all his tests in chemistry, and then afterwards applied what was demonstrated and turned things around, did very well in the course. I mean, we're talking about someone who is going to fail the course for sure, and yet ended up in an A. And same thing with Dana here. So pretty dramatic, but understand. And by the way, this happened to me about 35 years ago, but I didn't have Sandra McGuire laying out for me exactly what I needed to do. In fact, we're talking 35 years ago. Most about what we know how the brains work hadn't been figured out yet. It was so long ago. But my grades were going down. I reached a point in my life, I always got really motivated and I really wanted to do better academically. Didn't know what to do, so I just tried a bunch of stuff. And just by dumb luck, I had stumbled across some really powerful, effective learning strategies. And as a result, my grades really turned around. I mean, before I was usually about a B student, but I was dropping down to a C student. And I knew it was going to keep dropping if I didn't do something different. But after I tried those different things, I was getting A's. Well, actually, it was always almost A's. I always get one B until my very last term. And I finally got all A's. And through graduate school, I got all A's. But I was doing things that were not effective, but I didn't know. I had no idea. At least I knew I didn't know what it was that I did that really made me learn versus other things I did that weren't effective. Like I said, we don't know. Some of us think we know, but we don't. And so it wasn't until several years ago I looked at the research been done and I finally learned what it was that I did that was effective and the things that I did that were not effective. Thank goodness I wasn't doing just the ones who were ineffective, because I would have never had this job if that were the case. You know, many doors opened for me when my grades skyrocketed that would not have opened otherwise. So sharing this with you, you'll be able to do what I did far more efficiently, thanks to Sandra McGuire. All right. Now, when she gives this presentation, she only gives this presentation after a class has had their first exam. So when the question she asks the class at this point is, how many of you thought the exam was difficult? You know, some people would always raise their hands, but she always followed up with this question. How many of you got a score less than your desired score on the exam? And of course, more hands go up for that. And she says, well, we're going to talk about why there's this disconnect and what you can do so that you will get the score that you desire to get. And she says, I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions today, and there's really no right or wrong answers. You just answer with what you think about that. And the thing about those three students we looked at is they became expert learners by using metacognition. They studied to learn, not just to make the grade. Oh, yeah, and this is about me. I have to change that to 35 years ago now. I've been giving this presentation for a while. But anyways, sort of things that open up for me. So coming back to these three students here. And the thing is, we're going to be talking about today are those strategies that will allow you to make the same kind of improvement that these three students had on your very next test and all the ones after. It could change that quickly. And what she says, we're going to start off by telling you the most impactful strategy, what that is. The single most important mistake most students make, causing them to get less on their exams than what they thought they understood. It was how they were doing their homework. They were not getting the most out of their homework. How many of you have done this? When working on a homework problem, you flip back to the textbook or wherever there was some worked out examples to find one that was very similar. And you just use that example, copying its steps in order to get your answer. And if you do that, well, I know back when I was a student, I did that all the time. Nobody told me not to. Well, the thing is, the problem with that is your professor does not give you worked out examples with the exam, do they? None of the ones I know of do. You see, we have to prepare our brain to do the task it has to do on the exam. So with that being in mind, well, how are we going to do that? Well, here's what we're going to do instead to get the most out of our homework. Now, when you're reading through the textbook or lecture notes or anything like that, but any of your other classes, you have a textbook to read, and you're invariably going to come to a textbook example. What do you do with the textbook example? Well, and she asked the class, and a lot of them will admit, well, they skip over it. Why? Well, they figure I'll come back to it when I get stuck on the homework and I use it to help me do the homework. Oh, okay, so we're doing two things wrong here. Well, here's the other thing is, I want you to commit to never skipping another example from now on. So if you're given some example problems that do have worked out solutions for you to check out, don't look at the solutions until you've worked through that problem yourself. Okay. And then once you've worked through it, then you can look at the solution, the textbook or the worked out solution, and then see if you got the same answer. And if you did not get the same answer, without looking at the solution, go back to your work and find where your mistake is. Okay, and really push your brain. So you're really pushing your brain, even like when you were first working it out and your brain was saying, I don't know what to do. Well, you're just going to have to power on and push through until you get an answer. And now what you have to do on exam, because you don't want to leave the exam blank, so you power on. So that's what you're doing here. You're really pushing your brain. Oh, I forgot to mention, when you're reading the lecture notes or a textbook or what have you, pretend to yourself that you're going to be tested on it the next day, because that just ups and increases the intensity with which you are reading. And that's very, very important to do. So here you are, and maybe you still don't figure out as much as you try to find your error. Well, then go ahead, look at the example, but note very carefully where your mistake happened. The idea is, okay, so you made a mistake. At this point of your learning and studying, are mistakes good or bad? And most students will say, well, one, I'm not happy about it, but two, I'd much rather make the mistake here than on the test. So most agree that, okay, mistakes are good, but I really want to emphasize that mistakes are things that have to be made. That's how we learn. If you have you learned to play an instrument? Did you get it right and perfect the first try? Of course not. It sounded horrible the first time you were playing that instrument, but you kept at it and got better and better, learned from your mistakes till you got good at it. And if you're going out for sports, did you learn everything immediately right away? Probably not. If the coach was showing a new technique, you didn't just say, oh yeah, that technique, that makes sense, I could do that, and then not practice it. No, you practiced the heck out of it till you made sure that you knew how to do it. Well, it's the same thing with the math and statistics. You got to practice it so you can see where you're making mistakes and then work through that. Oh, have you ever said this or heard others say it? When they get their tests back, they say, oh, I would have done so much better on that exam. I just made a lot of careless mistakes. Well, I can remember saying that a lot way back when I was a student, until it got explained to me that, well, there really actually is no such thing as a careless mistake. We only think it's careless because once you see what the right thing is, the wrong thing looks obvious. But those so-called careless mistakes, those are all the mistakes that you're supposed to be making in this process right here, working through those textbook examples or practice problems that are provided for you. They're precious. Don't waste them. Don't skip over them. This is where you're pushing your brain, because you read the material beforehand, so you know what to do. Now you're working on recalling it and applying it to the problem at hand. And sometimes, you go down these wrong pathways. Well, that's important that you do that, because you'll see, they lead to a dead end. That's really part of your learning process. And then you see what does work, and for a fact what doesn't work. It's the learning process. And you're doing all of this before you even start your homework. So that when you do start the homework, you've already made these mistakes. Now you're just reinforcing the correct way to do it. And of course, after you've worked through, a few of the homework problems, then you could look back at an example and verify that you're doing all the steps. That's okay. But this is the process where you're making those mistakes and you're learning from them, even before you start the homework. And the homework is just reinforcing, the correct way to do it. All right. Now, here's some interesting data she had gathered. Now, this is one of those big lecture hall classrooms, lots of students in there, and she was called in there to give her presentation. But, not everybody makes it to class. So we have two groups here, those who attended Sandra's presentation and those who are absent. And these aren't recorded lectures like what you have. If you missed it, you missed it. Notice that these two groups are very similar in how they did on the first exam. Very, very similar. Well, how did things change after the presentation? Well, now understand, not everyone who attends a presentation is going to apply what they saw. It's really the students who are ready for a change. They're willing to try something different. Not everybody's willing to do that. But enough of them did it. We're talking about probably what were C students are now A students. They pull up the average. And here they're going, boy, that's almost went from a C- to a C+, but then it got even better by the final exam. They just were getting better and better at it. What happened to the other class? Well, you keep doing what you're doing, and you keep getting what you got. They just stayed right down there. So they just stayed there, C-, whereas the other class climbed on up, ending with quite a difference between the students who missed the presentation, overall average, and those who attended. And sometimes it's even more dramatic than that, because sometimes when the material is cumulative, you actually start dropping as you go along. And that's what happened to this class. They were almost at a C. Now they're all the way down to a definite D. So while they were going down, this was going up. Well, presentation can make quite a difference. Now, here's our desired outcomes for our short time together, this little 50-minute presentation. That you're going to analyze your current learning strategies for Math 244. You will understand exactly what changes you need to implement to make an A in the course. You will have concrete strategies to use during the remainder of the term, and you will use them in Math 244 and beyond. You might as well get A's in all your classes. What the heck? See, you're becoming a more efficient learner by studying smarter, not necessarily harder. And for example, those of you who are already A students, with these learning techniques, you're going to be able to accomplish what you do in less time. I mean, if I had known about this, I would have covered less time, because I wouldn't have wasted my time on the techniques that are not effective. I would have focused on just what is effective, and that saves time. Now, she would always ask these reflection questions of the group, and she would say that, one more thing before touching on this I meant to mention is, how many times have you heard students who would say, I studied for hours and hours and I still didn't do well? Let's go back to this previous slide. This is down here. Well, that's great. They're putting in the time. The only thing that's holding them back is they're using the wrong learning strategies. In other words, they didn't get this presentation. Once they change their learning strategies, they're going to get A's now if they're putting in that kind of time. So it's funny, just a little bit of knowledge can change everything. But what we got to clarify here is, and like we said, no right or wrong answers here, but what do you think? So she would actually have the students break up in pairs and discuss this. What's the difference, if any, between studying statistics and learning statistics? And so, they'd be discussing, then she'd tell them to come back and then gather some inputs from them. And just so you know that overall, generally, the thing she would hear is that studying, that's just memorizing. So I'll remember it for the test. It's tedious, and I really don't like it that much. Learning, on the other hand, this is when you've learned it, you understand it. I mean, you've learned it, so when you're being tested on something you learned, you know it. Yeah, you do well on that. In fact, I could teach that to somebody. So it's along those lines. But she did say, before she gathered this from them, that she's given this presentation to well over 10,000 students. And there's been a few places, a few people said that they were both exactly the same thing. Well, obviously, not many people think they're exactly the same thing. Most people do tend to think there's a difference, but we're really going to elaborate on it here to make sure that that's clear. Now, but we do have this other question here that we'll be going over, but it is extremely important that we make a distinction between studying and learning, because we're going to do the strategies that result in learning, and it's not just studying. Now, which of these two tasks would make you work harder? Now, I didn't say what you prefer to do, but work harder. So a couple of weeks, let's say that in 2-3 weeks, we'll have a test coming up. Task A, make an A on the test. A B at the very, very lowest. Of course, C is not an option. Unacceptable, but really, make an A on the test. Think how hard that would make you work. Option B, well, the class before the test, you're going to come up in front of the classroom and hold a review session where you summarize the material, go over the key points they need to remember, work through some examples, and answer any questions that anyone in the class has. Which of those two will make you work harder? And of course, you would have, have students raise their hands for which it is. Usually get some for option A, but usually a lot more for option B. And of course, you say, now there's nothing wrong with those who did option A, but she says that students tell me that, hey, if I gotta get in front of the classroom and explain everything, and worst of all, have to answer any questions, because they're not going to ask the easy ones, they're going to ask the tough ones, I'm going to have to make sure I really have that material down. I mean, I'd have to work a lot harder for that. Because if it's for an exam, you're just going, yeah, I think I got it. I think I got it. I got the pretty good feel for it. I should do well enough on the test. It's not like I have to teach it or anything. So the thing is, which mode have you been in? Have you been in study mode, just studying for the test? Or have you been learn mode where you could actually teach it? Well, if you're like me, studying for the test is all I ever knew. Nobody ever told me different. Well, right now, in this session, we're telling you different. Get the heck out of study mode, get into learn mode. Don't just think about making an A on the test, be able to teach the material. And if someone had told me that back when I was a student, I said, well, why? That doesn't make any sense. I'm a student. My job is to make an A on the test. I'm not the teacher. I don't have to teach this stuff. But here's the thing, and I don't know if this has ever happened to you. Somebody's kind of confused on something that you're quite knowledgeable on. In fact, you know that material very, very well. So you start explaining it to them because you're a nice person. And you're halfway through it, and you get absolutely stuck and stymied, and you can't believe it. Wait a minute. I could have sworn I knew this stuff. Why am I stuck here? Hey, it's happened to me. I was in a study group, but way back that 35 years ago, and I was doing, this has been when I was doing much better. And I had another person, just a little small study group of three of us, and me and the other guy, Judd. We were about the same. You know, if I got stuck on a homework problem, he figured it out. When he got stuck, I figured it out. So together we really got through that homework. But the other partner with us, Sam, he was always had a harder time grasping the material. So he was always stopping us, going, wait, that doesn't make sense. How does that work? So me and Judd, we were always kind of taking turns explaining it to him. And you see, if I found Sam, I would have to thank him so much for what he did for me, because it isn't until you teach the material you can find out what you don't know. You see, we don't know what we don't know. You know, I'd be halfway going through my explanation on something I knew I had down pat. I just knew it. And then I got stuck halfway through the middle. And Judd would say, hey, Larry, don't you hate it when that happens? Yeah, I do. But you know what? I would hate it even more if it happened on the exam. And that's exactly where it would have happened if Sam hadn't been there to make me practice teaching it. Now, you don't need a Sam. You don't need to actually have students to teach to. What you can do, and you don't even have to do this teaching out loud. You can do it quietly in your head, teaching your imaginary students. Just so you're doing that, you're going through your explanation as though you're teaching it. And that is the only way you are going to expose those gaps that you're completely unaware of. You do that, and then you won't have that horrible experience of going in for a test that you knew you have down pat and find out you don't. You'll catch it if you practice teaching the material. So that is why you need to practice teaching the material. So stay in learn mode, not study mode. Study is if you have to teach the material, not just make an A on the test, and actually practice teaching it. Now, why is this so important? Well, MTH244 is a lot harder than high school stats. I mean, we move through the material a heck of a lot faster. The material is conceptually more difficult and cumulative. Boy, is it cumulative. The problems are more involved, especially that two-way ANOVA. The tests are less straightforward and require you to apply several concepts at one time. So what we're talking about here is using metacognition to become an expert learner in statistics. So here we go. What the heck is metacognition? Well, it's your ability to be consciously aware of yourself as a problem solver, applying these techniques that Sandra McGuire is giving to you. You've got this, but you and only you can monitor yourself. You got to be honest with yourself. You know, as you're working on studying for this class, how are you doing? Are you just studying for the test? Well, your metacognitive mind won't tolerate that. It's going to say, hey, you know better than that. Now you use those practice examples, push your brain till you get an answer, then see if your answer matches with the correct answer. If not, then you find your mistake and learn from all of those mistakes. You got to be making mistakes and learning from them. That's how we learn. Okay. So you do that, and do that before you even start the homework. Right? And then make darn sure you practice teaching it to your imaginary students, because that's the only way you're really going to accurately judge your level of learning. So you're monitoring and controlling your processes that you are doing that. And that's what metacognition is. Now, there are different levels of learning. You may or may not have heard of Bloom's taxonomy, but it's one way of describing the different levels. Now, let's start at the bottom, the lowest level, which is just remembering just the basic facts. Think of this as just answering the what. So what do I do here? And if someone were to ask you, well, why and how and what if questions, you say, hey, I don't go there. I just stay and remember, I'm just tell you the answer to the what, and that's all I'm telling you. Well, that's a pretty low level of learning. Going up here is where you understand it well enough you can teach it to someone. Here you're just saying, I just got to know what I need to know for the test, and I don't need to know nothing more down here at remembering. But up here in understanding, you can teach it. Heck, you can explain in terms that your little nephew can understand, and also in ways that your grandma can understand. You're just going to explain it so clearly. Up here is you can apply these concepts on problems you've never seen before. Up here for analyzing the different components that are all involved. You could take one of them and explain how they interrelate with everything else. And then these up here, these are things you'd be doing up in your upper division coursework. Now, why she brings this up is she's asked the students, now back when you were in high school, we're talking about before you came to the university, but in high school, what was the highest level you needed to go up to? And you were just fine in high school. Well, that does depend on which high school you went to. There are some where remembering was just fine and dandy and you got good grades. But, there are others, they said, no, we definitely had to be up at understanding, because they would ask us a lot of why and what if and how questions that we had to answer. And so we had to be up here at understanding. And maybe there's a few that might go as high as applying. But usually understanding is about as high as high school students need to go. And they're doing great. But then when they come to the university, what level are you expected to be at? Well, here at the university, if you're taking classes in the STEM, the science building, it's up here to analyzing. That's right out of the gate. I said, well, that explains it, because, you'll have students who took chemistry in classes in high school and they did great, but that's because they were down at this level. Then they come over to university, take a chemistry classes, and they're expected to be at this level, but they're operating at this level, and then they're bombing their exams. So the solution to the problem is they got to bring it up a level or two. And how do you do that? We're going to use the study cycle. Oh, by the way, this little PowerPoint's available in the Moodle website, which is great, because this screen right here, boy, you should make a printout of this and pin it up somewhere, because this has all the concrete steps gathered in one spot, all summarized up. Now, I want to clarify parts of this. Let's start here at preview. Now, imagine any of your other classes. It could be a biology class, chemistry class, whatever it might be. But you know what the professor is going to lecture on. So you go to that chapter, and you don't need to read the whole chapter. Just take 10 minutes to preview it. Skim the chapter, noting headings and boldface words, review summaries, chapter objectives, might even come up with questions you'd like the lecture to answer for you. What you don't realize what you've done is you have given your brain a framework for the information that's going to come in during the lecture. And then while you're in the lecture and the information is coming in, and now we're oblivious to this, but this is what your brain is doing. When it gets that information, it goes, oh, I know right where this goes. It goes, it is putting all that pieces of information into that framework that you were so kind enough to give it. Now, if you had not done this, which only takes 10 minutes, then that means your brain has to try and organize all this incoming information, and that's not easy. And what you're aware of is you're sitting there and you go, wow, that's kind of hard to keep this all straight in my head. It's all just garbled up. This is confusing. But so that's why it's so dramatic when students try this. They're going, oh my gosh, these lectures make so much more sense now. They're so much easier to follow. You see, this is what was missing from our owner's manual on how to use our brains. Nobody told us this. Well, at least you're getting it now. Then, of course, you're in class. Oh, and try and up your intensity level where you're really paying attention. Shouldn't be too bad. You should be finding, hey, things are really making sense. Maybe you're jotting down notes, things like that. Now, when the class is over, as soon as you can, go back over what was covered in the class. You're trying to fill in any gaps or anything in there. And one thing I want to point out about this is that, have you ever seen a movie more than once? Most people have. And when you saw it the second time, did you see things you never noticed the first time? Yeah, I did. Well, it's the same thing here. You had a lot of information coming in during this class. You're going to miss some things, but when you go back over it, you'll catch those little missing pieces. So doing the preview, a 10 class review, this is a great start. It's not enough. You got to do more than this, because this is where the magic happens, the study sessions. But, doing that after the lecture and getting the most from the lecture, then you do these study sessions. And over here, we elaborate what's involved in these intense study sessions. Remember, intense? You're going to pretend like you're going to be tested on it the very next day. Now, this is where you're applying those concrete steps that Sandra gave you. But first, before you start that, set a goal. That just take a minute or so. But you just want to make super clear what it is you want to accomplish in the study session. And it's only one class. Each class you have is its own study sessions. So you might have 3 to 5 of these study sessions a day. But get super clear on that. And then with as much focus as you can, this is where you're doing that effective learning strategies. You're reading the text or the lecture notes. You get to the examples, and then you push your brain to recall what to do. And then compare the work, learn from those mistakes. Oh, by the way, I want to talk about why this is so effective. When they did the randomized double-blind controlled experiments, and they would break students up into random groups, and they would have them apply different study methods. They found there was one group that always did better than the others. And that was the group that focused predominantly, if not solely, on recalling the information. They were always testing themselves. And it was a surprise to the students, the professors, and a surprise to me. When I was turning things around, when I tested myself, I thought I was just checking on my progress. I didn't know I was applying the most powerful, efficient method. Now, of course, the neurologist can explain at the cellular level why it works, but just so you know, pushing your brain to recall the information is really, really what makes it all come together. But you got to keep doing it. You got to stay at it. But anyway, so you're learning from your mistakes. You practice teaching it. And then, and this goes on for as long as you can maintain that focus. Now, for some people with ADHD, 25 minutes might be as far as they can go, because anybody can do 25 minutes. But if you can go longer, that's great. Then do it. But it's very, very important that after that, you take a 10, 15-minute break. Go out for a walk, shoot some baskets, just do something you enjoy. To think of it as your reward for having done such a good focused study session there. But what you don't realize is happening, we're oblivious to this, your brain is organizing all of that, all that cell structure and everything. It's getting it all organized. We don't know what all that work is going on. We're just having a great time rewarding ourselves. But after that break, then do the review session. So this is where you work on recalling what you just learned. Very, very important. And what you want to do is and then the next day and the day after that, work on seeing how much you can recall from memory. That is the most powerful, effective learning strategy, is that you keep work on recall. You're always testing yourself. Now, here's the analogy. So first time you walk through a jungle or a dense forest, after you do that, you can just barely see the pathway you went through. Think of that as an analogy to the neural pathways you just got set up from this intense study session of this material. Well, then if you go through that pathway again, working to recall the information, bring it back, well, in a jungle, the pathway it's a little clearer now. And your neural pathway, it gets thicker. And then the day after that, you recall it again and you're finding, hey, it's coming a little easier. And you just keep work on the recalling, what you have covered. And what happens, it gets easier and easier, but then something magic happens. Those myelin sheaths develop around it and it locks it in. as they say, neurons that fire together, wire together. And that's what we're talking about, getting wired together. And that is when you have learned it. It is locked in. You could be tested on this, and it's easy for you to answer it now. It's even easy for you to teach it to somebody. Now, let's consider the opposite, the horror of skipping a day in studying. Because after doing an intense study session like this, you go a whole day before you look at it again. Well, instead of that neural pathway getting thicker as if you had reviewed, it got thinner. And if you go a second day, it's even thinner still till it's almost gone. Are you willing to let all this hard work disappear because you're letting 2 days go without reviewing? Don't do it. The owner's manual for your brain would forewarn you about that. Well, you didn't know, but you know now. So it's a huge difference between someone who lets days skip and their neural pathways are disappearing on them, and the person who keeps reviewing, just spending some time. It's not as much time to review as it was that first study session. But take time to review what you have done, and it just gets thicker and thicker till it locks in. Well, remember, repetition is the key. Be sure and ask those why, how, and what if questions, because that's how you teach it. And we can review, go back over everything you did that week. You work on recalling it. Make sure you can recall it all. And assess your learning, unless you got to practice teaching it to uncover those gaps that have eluded you, right? I'm telling you, these are the concrete steps. You do this and you will be amazed at your results. And if you're spending an enormous amount of time and not getting results, well, do this. Very interesting about the intensity levels, in that those who are learning to be doctors and are medical school, they got an enormous amount of material to learn. And so it was noted that, this was intriguing, the ones who got the very, very highest test scores were spending less time studying than those who didn't do as well. They thought, well, that doesn't make sense. What's going on here? So they, interviewed to see what was going on. And there was one thing different. Those who got the very, very highest scores were the ones who studied with the most intensity. So in other words, they were focused. With their smartphone, they made sure that thing was turned off. They would go to the library where there's no interruptions. They were absolutely focused 100% on their doing. They would trick themselves into thinking they were going to be tested on the next day. And boy, they better learn it. They weren't messing around. So here's our effective strategies. Always solve problems without looking at example or solution, because those, textbook examples or practice solutions, those are precious. Don't waste them. Memorize everything you're told to memorize. Ask the why, how, and what if questions. Otherwise, you can't teach it. So test your understanding by giving those mini lectures on concepts to your imaginary students. And you got to spend it on statistics every day, because if you don't, it dwindles away. Use the study cycle with intense study sessions. Aim for 100% mastery, not 90%. If you're aiming for 90%, obviously you're studying for the test. And that is what we want to quit doing. These are just some suggestions she has. Maybe not so much for this class, but sometimes, some classes can feel like they got so many concepts and how you're supposed to keep it all straight, how everything interrelates. Hey, go to the chapter of contents. They got it all organized for you. Hey, it's great. And you could grab this little piece and to your imaginary student, explain how this concept relates to these rectangles down here, how it relates to this oval up here, and this big rectangle up here. You can explain how this relates to all the other aspects. That very high level analysis level of learning. Hey, do you ever get some concepts mixed up with each other? Hey, it happens all the time. But here's a simple solution. Get out a piece of paper, write down those two concepts you're mixing up with each other. Go over how they're similar. There's something similar about them. That's why you're getting them mixed up. So just spell it out. But then here, clearly spell out how they're different. And you're writing this out. That really helps. And then you just review this each day. And after a few days, you're going to find, hey, you've got it. It's not confusing anymore. So it's a great tool. Now, which one of these next two slides more accurately describes your actions before test one? Now, of course, this was data she gathered from students. She had erroneously gave them the lecture presentation before their first test. She learned that doesn't work. But here's the data she was able to gather as a result, because they had seen the presentation, so they could reflect on, well, why didn't I do well? Well, I didn't spend enough time on the material. I started the homework too late. Hey, if you start the homework too late, like the day before it's due, are you going to have enough time that you're willing to read through the whole chapter and work through all the practice problems? No, you say, I don't have time for that. I got to get this done. So in other words, all these great techniques, powerful learning strategies, you just threw them all out the window because you started the homework too late. I hope you appreciate how disastrous this is. Didn't memorize information I needed to. I did not use the book. I didn't read anything. I just went to the lecture and figured, hey, if I don't get it from that, I'm not going to get it. Well, that's not good. Assumed I understood information that I had read and reread, but had not applied. Now, here's a technique I wasted time on because I didn't know better back when I was a student. Because, when I would read and reread something, it felt more familiar. I actually thought I was learning when I wasn't. If this is all you're doing here and you take a test, you're going to find you don't test well. So, gee, I guess I don't test well. No, you're just using a bad learning strategy. And this is a bad one. And it's misleading too. It can trick you. And those who did well, they attested at doing the preview review for every class. That's not enough, by the way. It's a good start. Did a little of the homework at a time. Well, hopefully not too little. Used the book and did the suggested problems. Now that's better. Made flashcards of the information be memorized. That's good. But this is the really one that made a difference. Practice explaining the information to others. Now, which group did you most resemble? One or the other. So get the most out of homework. Start the problems early, the day they are assigned. That's the only way you're going to have enough time to apply these techniques. Don't flip back to see example problems, them yourself. Give up too soon, but you have to, if you're really stuck, you'll have to give up eventually. And also with tutorial centers. Now, before you go to a tutorial center, you are expected to try to understand the concept and work the problem by yourself first. That way you come prepared to ask questions. You know where it is you're getting stuck, and you can go directly to that, and you can explain what you do understand and to the point where you're getting stuck, and the tutor will be able to help you, very efficiently. Don't just go down there and go, teach me. Now, she always gives these groups a challenge, and it goes something like this. So this would be the Spring 2023 challenge. And the challenge is this, that the population mean for everyone in this class, we took the mean of all our GPAs at the end of this term, it'd be a 3.6. And not a single one of you would have a GPA less than 3.0. Yeah. And so it's a commitment to personal and group excellence. How do we know you can do this? Well, she gives an example. This group, they didn't think they could do it. I mean, they had this presentation on the 13th of August, 10 days. They're going to have their test. They say, boy, that's not much time. And, in our last test, we got a C average, 74, 78. And you're telling us that this whole class will have an average of 84? Sandra, I don't think we can do it. Well, she says, that's not what I was asking. I'm just asking, are you willing to try for the next 2 weeks? Are you willing to try these techniques I shared with you or not? Oh, yeah, we're willing to try. I said, well, that's all I ask. And lo and behold, sure enough, they got an 85 average. It can be done if you try. So what can you do starting now? Well, first of all, make sure you're spending enough time. Now, general rule, if you're taking a class in the science building, that is a class that requires 2 hours per week for every hour in class. If you're not putting in that kind of time, you're not putting in enough time. But make sure that that time really counts. And that's where that study cycle you were given comes through. Now, aim for higher levels of learning, 100% understanding. Use office hours. My office hours are there. So you come on in. When you get stuck on something, come in and see me. Use the study cycle and use study sessions with intensity. Remember, that's a huge secret. The greater your intensity, the more you learn in less time. And use metacognition to study smarter. Hey, I got a little assignment for you. It's an easy one. And that is, what strategy will you commit to implementing for the next 2 to 3 weeks, just to try it out? So you don't feel like it's a huge commitment for the rest of your life. Just trying it out for 2 to 3 weeks. But if you don't start within the next 48 hours, you probably never will. So here, let me show you in Moodle what I got posted for you here. Let's see here. There we go. Let's go. So there's Friday. So here's the little journal assignment. So the idea is just a paragraph, just what you're willing to try. And I also posted elsewhere, but I also have a 2-page document where I summarize the information for you. So you could just glean through there and see what you're willing to try to do. So you don't necessarily have to go back and watch the whole PowerPoint again. You could just use this document to help you decide what it is you might be willing to try. And oh, by the way, I posted this link here of Sandra McGuire giving this presentation. Maybe you'd like to see her. I mean, after all, she's the one who created this presentation. You could see her giving it. And there's that little summary document there. All right, well, that's it. I just wanted to share this with you. And I understand not everybody is at a point right now that they feel they can make drastic changes in how they study. But I just want you to have this knowledge. Save this paper somewhere, this document, so that if you do reach a point in your life where, oh my gosh, I got to do something different, what will it be? And then you're trying to remember, well, wait, I remember hearing something many, many years ago. What was that? Well, dig out this document, put it somewhere safe where you'll remember where to find it, so you'll be able to do that. And you know what? I'll bet you'll get to it at a younger age than I did. You see, I was a college dropout for 7 years. I don't recommend you do that. But so I was 29 years old before I got really motivated in doing this. And you can beat that, I'm sure of it. So anyways, that's it. And I will see you Monday.